What up, folks? It's your boy Chicago, the handsome liberal, back to you with another video. As you can see, this one is titled Gabbie Petito, Should Brian Laundrie Talk? Well, I got a lot to say on that, but before I do, I'm going to ask that you do what I always ask you to do. Go ahead and punch that subscribe button. Feel free to give me a like if you like what I got to say, and there's no problem with you hitting the dislike button if that's your beef. It helps the analytics of the channel. So, what should Brian Laundrie have to say? Should he choose to speak, or should he choose to speak at all? Which is apparently what his counsel is advising against. In my humble opinion, we want blood from Brian Laundrie. Now, before we get into that, he is missing right now. The parents have reported him missing. Apparently, he's been missing for a few days, and they waited before they notified authority that he was missing. The reports are that he left the house with a backpack on and said he was going somewhere, and he just disappeared without a trace. So I'm going to be the first to say that this whole thing sounds fucked up. It sounds shady as hell that in the middle of such a huge investigation, the parents would let him go missing for a few days before they would say anything. Obviously, I told you before that what Utah police did was outrageous, but they didn't know all this shit was going to turn out. But anyway, you often hear people say, for instance, in my last video, I talked about how I believe Gabbie was a violent woman. I mean, that's what the Utah body cam footage showed. And I received a lot of feedback asking, well, what would you do if this was your daughter? I would snap. I would go find Brian, and I would make him talk. People were talking about doing all kinds of horrible things to Brian. And the question asked over and over again was, what would you do if this was your daughter? Well, I got to flip that around and say, what would you do if Brian was your son? I mean, the entire state of Florida, if not the entire United States, wants blood from Brian. Would you advise him to just come forward and start singing like a bird if you thought it wasn't in his best interest? There's no reward for coming clean, particularly in a state like Florida. What a lot of us think may have happened could lead to him receiving the death penalty, or at the very least, a very long stint in prison. So, and I'm not saying that I believe that Brian Laundrie did anything wrong. I said in my previous video that I believe that Gabbie was a violent woman, and it's possible that Brian may have snapped. Like I said in the other video, we don't accept this from men. No matter how hard you're being beaten up by a woman, we do not accept men striking back or hitting back. But it happens. I brought up several stories about women doing the exact same thing. Namely, Lorena Bobbitt, chopping off a guy's member after saying that she was abused for years, and she escaped with no time. We forgave her for that. We understood that she was a battered woman, and she finally snapped. We don't understand that a guy can be battered over and over again and finally snap. But like I said on the video of the Utah police there, everything about that said domestic violence. He was beaten, he had scratches on him, and he was lying about where the scratches came from, and the police determined they came from her. Everything about that is why domestic violence laws were created, and nevertheless, she still walked. So if you're Brian and you did potentially snap and defend yourself, is it going to help him if you come forward and say that? No, because I just told you society does not accept that. So even if he would have told his attorney a situation like that, like I brought up Lorena Bobbitt. Let's say Lorena Bobbitt was a man and they were still looking for the guy that this happened to. Her attorney would advise her to keep quiet also, because nobody is going to accept a man snapping and doing that to a woman from being battered. So if that is the case, what I talked about earlier, which I know a lot of the viewers had an issue with that, because the viewers are sexist too to some degree. Nobody accepts a man hitting a woman back. But if that's what happened, you can understand why the attorneys would say you need to just sit on it and keep quiet. Coming forward and telling them that, it's not going to help that. What are you going to do? Say that a little smaller woman was hitting on you over and over again and you snapped and you beat the fuck out of her? That's not going to be acceptable. It would only be acceptable if Gabbie did that to him. So it makes sense to tell him to keep his mouth shut. Now, we all believe, or I won't say all of us, we all believe just about that she perished, and she perished in the vicinity of Brian Laundrie. We all believe that she's no longer with us, and we believe that Brian Laundrie is probably the one that she made the transition into the afterlife with, and he probably has something to do with it. But we just don't have any acknowledgement on how that happened or what transpired. And this is where I'm saying that it could have came the way I'm pointing out. And I'm saying that if I was his attorney or I was his parents, I would also tell him there's no benefit in coming forward. Everybody wants blood from this guy. The only thing we're going to accept, we're going to accept from Brian Laundrie is an out and out confession, starting with "I killed her." That's pretty much it. Anything else, if he says what I just said about potentially being a victim, we're not going to take that off of this guy. The only thing we want to hear is that he killed her and it's time to punish him. That's what we want done, and we want him to get the maximum amount of punishment. He's already been tried and convicted in a court of public opinion. I can't imagine anything else without a lengthy videotape proving his side being able to save him. So people go, well, he needs to come forward and say something. Nothing he says is going to be in his best interest. I mean, let's just be real. Nothing he says is going to be in his best interest. It's kind of like exactly what his attorney advised. His attorney is quoted as saying, when the police say anything you say can and will be used against you, that is true. And therefore, I have advised my client to keep quiet. It is true. It's absolutely true. It's not just true for Brian Laundrie. It's true for all of us. There's no benefit when you are the subject of an investigation in talking to police. Any attorney will tell you that. Any attorney worth their salt will tell you that. So that is why he is not talking, is because it's not going to do him any good if he doesn't get hit in the head with tomatoes and bottles while he is giving a press conference. Nobody likes this dude. So why would you come forward and say something to a crowd that has already determined you need to spend the rest of your life in prison if not receiving a death penalty? So I would absolutely advise him to keep quiet if he was my son, friend, a client, whatever the case may be. And my guess is most of you guys would too if you sat down and looked at it logically. But just like what I mentioned in the domestic violence video before this, how we all are sexist, we instantly go to her side and view things from her standpoint. If this was reversed and Brian was missing and Gabbie came forward and wasn't talking, we would absolutely be willing to toss around what she abused. That's a very popular question when a woman kills a man. Well, did he abuse you? Because that's an out. That is a way that, potentially receiving less time in prison or a lesser sentence, if not one at all. So it's very often that when a woman kills a man, her defense presents a case where he was abusing her because society accepts her acting violently when she's being abused. And like I said, in this case, they're not going to accept that from him. So what would I advise Brian to say? Nothing. I wouldn't have advised him to go off running into the woods, which is what they're suggesting he did, because like I said, society wants blood. So if he happens to turn up somewhere and, or pop up around the wrong crowd, he could basically receive street justice. That's not in his best interest. He should either stayed in a home or went on the run. Now, that's a whole nother video in itself, probably coming from all types of YouTubers, because I personally believe there is a strong possibility that he is not necessarily missing, but being aided and abetted in running away. I'm sure a lot of you believe that too, and I said that from day one, knowing that the crowd is not going to accept any type of explanation from him, that it's in his best interest to probably flee Florida. As long as it's not illegal, it's not a crime for him to leave the state yet, because he's a subject of an investigation. He hasn't been indicted or anything like that. Leave. I mean, why would you stay around here where they're hunting for you and they got all types? You got half of Florida talking about what they would do if they get their hands on the guy. Leave. There's nothing in your best interest. You're not going to walk to the neighborhood store or neighborhood supermarket and shop like normal. They're going to kill you if they get your hands on you. So I would advise him to keep his mouth closed and leave the area. Leave the area for as long as you possibly can. And it looks like the advice I'm saying I would give him, he probably already has received. So what do you guys think? If Brian was the one that you you were related to, or he was your client, or he was your husband or son, or whatever the case may be, what advice would you give him? Would you give him the advice to step forward and speak to the mob that already has determined what should happen to you and already has tried and convicted you in a court of public opinion? Or would you advise her to do something like what I'm talking about? There's no good outcome to this. There really isn't. Once like I said in my other video, once Utah police essentially guided her into talking her way out of a clear-cut domestic violence arrest, you have this. And this is a primary example, I guess I would say, of privilege gone wrong. And I know some of you are not going to like when I say this, but if Gabbie was a sister, she would be in jail eating bologna sandwiches right now, and we would know where she's at. She would be alive. That's plain and simple. I mean, because what she did was a clear-cut case of a crime. But because he let her go, the two probably ended up talking on the phone together and getting back together, and bad shit continued to happen. Anyway, I'm going to end it at this. Just want to know what you guys would say if you were advising Brian, not Gabbie, but Brian. What would you say? Hit me up in the comments. It's your boy Chicago, the handsome liberal. Talk to you in the next video.